how long will it take to establish the first cloud nation?
I actually think we will get startup cities this decade and cloud countries by the middle or the end of the 2030s. I think it'll happen faster than people think. Because you think about Bitcoin, it took 10 years to get to where it is, which is actually not that long, right? In the grand
Yeah.
scheme of things. Ethereum was only 5 or 6 to get to where it's gotten. And so, a lot of things happen faster at internet speed. So the question is, how quickly can you build up an international brand in a sense of nationalism and community? You can do that pretty fast nowadays, at least the size. Whether you can get the affinity is a different thing. But I mean, a cloud city, like depending on how you define it, 10,000 people, 100,000 people, I think that'll happen by the 2030s. The basic thing is, if you think about what happened with crypto, it had both these absolute numerical, things that were market driven, like just the price of Bitcoin, and then it also had sort of the social markers of acceptance, like, oh, this the first venture round in Bitcoin. Oh, Bitcoin is listed on Bloomberg. Oh,
Yeah.
Bitcoin is mentioned by the celebrity and so on, right? All of those were markers along the way, right? And it's funny, now we don't even think of that being a big deal. Of course, the celebrity mentioned, but in the early days, I remember there was a time when I had every single paper and article ever written about Bitcoin on my hard drive, because I printed them all out. Dan Benet used to maintain this. So in the same way, that was how you got the emergence of a cryptocurrency. You had an absolute thing that you could drive, in good weather or bad, and then the relative things would kind of come in, the social metrics would come in. So the absolute thing that we can drive for the cloud country is the size of the population and also other metrics like the real estate or the GDP of the crypto economy. And then you get these metrics like, first mentioned by a celebrity and, first acknowledgement by a politician and so on and so forth, until eventually you get that first international recognition, right? And the thing is, as you go through in this article, like most people don't realize this, but here's a question. Like, so what percentage of countries do you think have less than 10 million people?
Man. I have no idea. 10%.
See, a lot of people think that because we all live in big countries, right? We live
Yeah,
in,
I'm sure.
right?
Yeah, I'm sure it's like more like 90%.
Yeah, so it's interesting. It's basically, it's something, depending on how you count, it's on the order of, I think, 30% are less than 1 million in size and 60% less than 10 million,
Yep.
right? So those are actually small for social networks, right?
Yeah.
Relative,
Yeah.
right?
It's not a huge hurdle.
In terms of number of people, it's not a huge
Yeah.
hurdle. The fundamental question is, can you get strength of affiliation?
Yeah.
Right. And so, to have Luxembourg in the cloud is not necessarily that crazy. To have 1 million people ish in Estonia, Luxembourg, where they have a sense of identity in the cloud is not actually that crazy an idea. And the critical thing when I talk about how to start a new country, see at the top, you see those 7 methods, right? The first 3 are the obvious, like election, revolution, and war. We'll call it the fiat methods, right? And those work, but they're problematic in different ways. They're all conflict. They're all conflict with other human beings, right? Micronations, sitting in space, are kind of fanciful things that depend upon things that don't work. But the cloud country is like the 7th approach, where we're basically just building a large enough group up in the cloud that can crowdfund territory on Earth. And here's an important thing, by the way, a very important thing. The territory on Earth can just be a fractal combination of different cul-de-sacs and ranches and apartment buildings and individual rooms all around the world. Like, here's one way of putting it. You're not in San Francisco anymore, but you remember when we stood at One Front Street, we'd look out the window, right? You could see all of these windows in San Francisco, right? And you've probably seen these panoramas of New York City or something like that at night with all these windows, okay? So here's a question. If you were to light up the flag of Facebook in every window where someone used Facebook, how many windows would light up, right? If you looked at a panorama of New York City and you asked, okay, behind this window, is there a Google user? Is there a Facebook
Of course. User? Yes, of course.
Right.
It's everyone.
So here's the thing. It's everyone. However, when Google and Facebook rose, it wasn't as if a flag was unfurled in front of each window, marking their control of territory.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's a different thing. It creeps up on you. Yeah.
Right. That's right. But had that happened, it would have been a very different perception of what the internet was, both for
Right.
good and bad, right? For bad, it would have aroused backlash. For good, it would mean like, whoa, this thing is growing fast. Wow, this is way more. Like 1 year, nobody would have, you may have seen a flag or two. And then like 2 years later, every single window would have had a flag, right?
Yep.
And so the thing is that, when I talk about a cloud country, I'm talking about a fractal state. And this is a little bit of a deep point, but basically, most people don't know this, but the ocean was like the first peer-to-peer network, right? Why was it so critical to have a port? Why did Portugal, want a port? Why was it great that it had ports? Because it could just send stuff directly to Brazil and to Macau, and it didn't have to go like overland through Russia and so on, right? So it was basically it could just send packets peer-to-peer, so to speak. And so that's why the culture of maritime countries developed differently than the culture of landlocked countries. Okay. So Germany's culture versus England's culture is very different. And so the thing is that, when we go and look at the map of, let's say, a country like Indonesia, we don't realize this, but we're actually projecting an abstraction on it. Indonesia is an archipelago. There's all these individual islands. They're separated by the ocean, but we think of them as a country. Now, imagine that you have all those individual islands as pockets of land around the world, and they're separated by the internet, but they're networked together and they think of themselves as a country. They're putting that flag out the window conceptually, or at least having it up in their room, right? They have declared themselves, they have LARPed themselves a citizen of this new republic, right? And you know what? Like at first, that's the LARPiest thing in the world, right? Live action role playing, it's Dungeons and Dragons stuff. And that's awesome. Okay. Because you want people to essentially not take it seriously. They think it's a joke. That's fine. Right. And that gives you kind of room to build. And so you build and you build. And eventually what happens is, you have 5 people who are individually in apartments in New York City and, like Boston or whatever, and they get together in your online community and they crowdfund a cul-de-sac, right? Now you've got a little corner with 5 houses that all, live in each other. And it's almost like water droplets, like assembling. You have all these little pockets around the world. Now we actually have a precedent for this. You know what that precedent is? There's several precedents.
What?
One of them is just tech companies, right? If you think about Google,
Right.
Google has little offices all around the world, right?
Right.
But those are corporate HQs. However, when you go and open Bing your card, you're stepping into a little slice of Google. It's Google branded everywhere, right? You're on the Google network. You're a citizen of Google. You're within kind of the Google, envelope everywhere, right? But that's just for corporate real estate, commercial real estate. You could apply the same concept to residential real estate, and you have the century-line passport that opens the door. And this is what I mean by the first network state, where basically all these people are conceptualizing themselves as citizens of a new kind of state. And they don't need permission from anybody else. They just need peer-to-peer permission from each other to treat each other like citizens. So physical levels of civility, for example, are one concept there, right? And the thing about this, which is interesting, is obviously crypto is very important because it gives them sovereignty. It gives them sovereign communications. It gives them sovereign currency. They can crowdfund things. They have money that others can't take because, like, of course, they have to render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, obey the laws of whatever country they're in. But like an outright robbery of the community is difficult to do because, this is stronger, right? It's in the cloud. And when you start thinking about where you can go with that, you can go very, very, very far. For example, we can do crowdfunded software development in VR of what our first cities will look like. And we literally build them in VR. And, with Autodesk and AutoCAD, we can actually make it something where, we're building them to spec. We're building them to effectively be printed out, right? And so you actually start doing something where you do the maximum you can on the computer, and then you get real estate developers and construction guys to look at that and be like, okay, that is $100,000 to materialize this VR building into the physical world. Remember the scene from Fight Club, famous scene where all the IKEA things have price tags on them, right? So imagine you look around this VR city that we've built, and you're like, okay, it's 100K to materialize that building and 50K for that and 20. Okay, so it's $20 million to materialize the city. Done. Okay, and you get a quote from one of these prefab people who can snap the whole thing together, or maybe it's less than that. And one of the things that's really phenomenal about this is you can take that VR environment, and because it's all digital, you put on your AR glasses and you can actually see it in the desert. You can visit beforehand. And because you built it virtually, you can bid all of these developers against each other. And often it's like a 10x difference. A real estate developer in Arizona will quote you a totally different price than somebody in Minnesota or somebody in, Ukraine or something like that. And of course, you're taking jurisdiction and other things into account. right? But the wide open lands of, especially the American West are pretty interesting here because, they're going to have satellite internet from Starlink, right? All of this empty terrain, we can now like sort of resettle the map in a different way. And so
That's
this is all
fascinating.
crazy. Go ahead.
No, I'm recalling a recent conversation we had where like you were basically like I'm all in on AR VR, and now it's starting to kind of fit together how you're seeing the different pieces of the puzzle fit together.
That's right. That's right. Like
Um,
essentially, it's something where, um, when you look at what technology is doing holistically, it is, with mobile and with VR and with cloud and remote and with crypto, we're cutting all the obligate ties to the land, right? First, your books get virtualized with Kindle, and now your food with Instacart, and your car with Uber, and your physical mail, and your this, and now your wallet and your keys. All this stuff just gets digitized up into the cloud and on your phone. And so you can move around, or you can put on the VR headset and be in a completely different world, or you can be in AR and you can be in a different world while among other people. And so the ability to opt in to networks of other folks where you can literally just create your own reality or your virtual reality and then make it physical reality, that is increasing, right? And so that's the kind of stuff I think about a lot. And then the other thing I think about is what's the next step after that? So basically, with the crypto university, we start with teaching crypto, of course, and then you can teach the computer science that buttresses crypto, right? Everything that you need to know digital signatures and hash functions, and of course, big O notation, and like you can basically do a full computer science education because blockchains are like browsers or operating systems. They are just very, very sophisticated pieces of software that include, in the fullness of everything, they have a compiler and they have a programming language. Obviously, they've got a database and they've got a networking protocol, and they've got an API that you can write stuff with, and they'll sometimes have formal verification nowadays, and blah blah. You can throw a bunch of computer science stuff at it, right? If you take block explorers, you have search, right? So you essentially can use crypto to teach all of computer science, right? And then you can go from there and you can basically say, well, to actually physically materialize a city, eventually you're going to need the physical engineering disciplines, which are, chemical engineering and electrical engineering and civil engineering and mechanical engineering and so on, right? So you start teaching those. And so in this fashion, you kind of have, how the land grant universities grew in the 1800s, right? They're focused on the practical problems of developing the land and teaching people how to farm and till and, make the, desert or the hills bloom. And so we kind of go back to that future. And one thing I do think about is, a lot of these crypto fortunes. If we're going back to the future, well, Leland Stanford endowed Stanford, right? And so this is a great way to turn some of that, those funds into free online education for everybody, right? And so this is how I'm thinking about it. Like the crypto university is sort of related to bootstrapping the city and so on. It's kind of crazy thing that maybe only I would do, but we'll see if it works. So that's what I'm working on.
I love that.